damn it, old woman! Die already! I want the pension!
The afternoon sun filtered through yellowed curtains in the small apartment on Maple Street, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Margaret Sullivan sat in her wheelchair by the window, her frail hands trembling as she clutched a photograph of her late husband. She was 79 years old, and every breath seemed to require more effort than the last. The bruise on her left cheek had finally started to fade from purple to a sickly yellow-green, but her son had made sure to give her a fresh one just that morning. Thomas Sullivan stood in the kitchen, slamming cabinet doors as he searched for something to eat. At 46 years old, he had the bloated face of a man who had spent too many years drinking away his potential. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair greasy and unkempt, and his clothes smelled of stale cigarette smoke and spilled beer. He had been living with his mother for 3 years now, ever since his wife finally left him and took the kids. That was when he discovered that his mother's monthly pension check could support his habits quite nicely. The apartment was a testament to neglect. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, the garbage overflowed, and the air carried the stench of unwashed laundry and decay. Margaret's bedroom, once tidy and filled with memories, had been reduced to a prison cell where she spent most of her days alone, listening to her son move through the apartment like a predator circling its prey. Thomas found nothing in the cabinets that interested him. He slammed the last door shut and turned to face his mother, his expression darkening. She tried to make herself smaller in the wheelchair, instinctively knowing what was coming. "Where's the checkbook?" Thomas's voice was low and dangerous, the kind of quiet that preceded violence. Margaret's voice came out as a whisper. "Thomas, please, we talked about this. The money needs to last until the end of the month. We need to buy your father's heart medication and the electric bill is due, and I don't give a damn about bills." Thomas crossed the room in 3 long strides, his shadow falling over his mother like a dark cloud. "That's my inheritance you're wasting on pills and electricity. My money. You're just too stubborn to die and let me have what's rightfully mine." "Thomas, I'm your mother." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she had learned long ago that tears only made him angrier. "I raised you. I worked 2 jobs to send you to college. When your father got sick, I took care of him for 7 years. This pension is all I have left." Thomas's face contorted with rage. He had heard this speech before, and it meant nothing to him anymore. All he saw when he looked at his mother was an obstacle between him and financial freedom. The pension wasn't large, maybe $2,000 a month, but it was his ticket to not having to work, his excuse to spend his days at the bar or the casino or anywhere else that helped him forget what a failure he had become. "You should have died with Dad," Thomas said, and the cruelty in his voice made Margaret flinch. "At least then you would have been useful. At least then I wouldn't have to waste my life taking care of a useless old woman who can't even walk anymore." He grabbed the handles of her wheelchair and shook it violently, the wheels rattling against the floor. Margaret's hands flew to the armrests, trying to steady herself, but her weakened grip couldn't hold on. She cried out as the wheelchair tipped slightly, threatening to dump her onto the hard floor. "Stop. Please, Thomas, stop." Her voice rose to a shriek of terror. Thomas laughed, a sound devoid of humor or humanity. He released the wheelchair, letting it rock back into place, and Margaret sobbed with relief, but the relief was short-lived. Thomas moved to the small table where she kept her purse and began rifling through it, looking for her debit card. "You changed the PIN again, didn't you?" He dumped the contents of her purse onto the floor. Lipstick, tissues, old receipts, and photographs scattered across the linoleum. "You think you're so clever hiding money from me, but it's my money. Do you understand that? Mine." Margaret watched helplessly as her son destroyed the last remnants of her dignity. The photographs on the floor showed a different time, a different Thomas. There he was at 5 years old, grinning with a gap-toothed smile. There he was at graduation, proud and full of promise. There he was on his wedding day, looking at his bride with genuine love. What had happened to that boy? What had twisted him into this monster? "The pin is in my address book," Margaret said quietly, defeated. "In the drawer by my bed." Thomas's eyes lit up with greedy triumph. He strode toward her bedroom, leaving Margaret alone in the living room, surrounded by the debris of her scattered belongings. She heard him tearing through her things, opening drawers and throwing their contents onto the floor. When he returned, he held the small address book in one hand and her debit card in the other. "See? Was that so hard?" Thomas pocketed both items. "I'm going out, don't wait up." "Thomas, please, if you take all the money, how will I eat? How will I get my medication?" Margaret's voice broke on the last word. Thomas paused at the door, and for a brief moment something flickered in his eyes. Shame, perhaps, or a distant memory of the love he once felt for this woman. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, buried under years of resentment and self-loathing. "Figure it out," he said, and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Margaret sat alone in the apartment, tears streaming down her weathered face. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the neighborhood continuing its daily rhythm. Children playing in the park across the street, a dog barking, a car alarm going off in the distance. The world kept turning, indifferent to her suffering. She had called the police once, 6 months ago, after Thomas had beaten her so badly she couldn't get out of bed for a week. They had come, taken a report, and talked to Thomas. But Thomas was charming when he needed to be. He told them his mother was confused, suffering from dementia, imagining things. He showed them how well he was taking care of her, pointing to the food in the refrigerator that a neighbor had brought, the clean sheets on her bed that a visiting nurse had changed. The officers had looked at Margaret with pity but skepticism, and they had left. Thomas had made her pay for that call with 3 broken ribs. She had no other family. Her daughter had moved to Australia 20 years ago and rarely called. Her sister had died of cancer. The few friends she once had were either dead or too old and infirm to help. She was trapped in this apartment with a son who saw her as nothing more than a meal ticket, waiting for her to die. Margaret picked up the photograph of her husband, holding it close to her chest. "Help me, John," she whispered. "I don't know what to do anymore." But John was gone, and no help seemed to be coming. Except it was. At that very moment, a man walked down Maple Street, his feet carrying him with purpose toward the apartment building where Margaret Sullivan suffered in silence. He wore simple clothes that had seen better days, jeans worn thin at the knees, a flannel shirt that had been washed so many times the colors had faded to soft pastels, and work boots that had walked countless miles. His dark hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, and his beard was neatly trimmed. To anyone passing by, he looked like a day laborer or perhaps a handyman, but his eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who had seen everything, witnessed every human cruelty and every human kindness, and judged both with perfect understanding. Jesus had been walking the earth in human form for weeks, as he did periodically, moving from town to town, listening to prayers that rose from broken hearts. He had been in Chicago when he heard Margaret's whispered plea, and something in her voice, in the depth of her suffering and her refusal to give up hope, had drawn him here. He approached the apartment building and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled of old cooking and mildew. Several doors showed signs of neglect, paint peeling, numbers hanging crooked. He stopped in front of apartment 3C and knocked gently. Inside, Margaret's heart jumped at the sound. Thomas had only been gone for 20 minutes. Had he forgotten something? Was he coming back angry? She wheeled herself toward the door, her hands shaking as she reached for the lock. "Who is it?" Her voice was barely audible. "A friend," came the reply, and there was something in that voice that made Margaret's fear subside. It was warm and steady, the voice of someone who meant no harm. She opened the door and found herself looking up at a stranger whose face somehow seemed familiar, as if she had seen it in dreams or prayers. Jesus smiled at her, and in that smile was a compassion so profound that Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes for an entirely different reason than before. "May I come in?" he asked. Margaret nodded, unable to speak, and wheeled backward to allow him entry. Jesus stepped into the apartment, and his presence seemed to fill the space, driving back the shadows of fear and despair that had taken up residence in these rooms. He looked around, taking in the disorder, the signs of violence and neglect. His gaze lingered on the scattered photographs on the floor, on the bruise fading on Margaret's cheek, on the empty refrigerator visible through the open kitchen door. His expression remained calm, but there was a weight to his silence that spoke of judgment deferred but not forgotten. "You're in pain," Jesus said, kneeling beside her wheelchair so they were at eye level. It wasn't a question. "I've known worse," Margaret replied, trying to maintain some dignity. "You learn to endure. Endurance is not the same as acceptance," Jesus said gently. "You don't have to accept this." "What choice do I have?" The words burst from Margaret like a dam breaking. "He's my son. I can't just throw him out. He has nowhere to go. And maybe if I'm patient enough, if I love him enough, he'll remember who he used to be. He was such a sweet boy. You should have seen him before." "I did see him," Jesus interrupted, and there was something in his tone that made Margaret stop and truly look at him. "I saw him when he was 5, and you stayed up all night with him when he had pneumonia. I saw him when he was 12 and you defended him against bullies at school. I saw him when he was 18 and you sacrificed your savings to send him to college. I saw every moment of love you gave him, Margaret. How do you know my name? She whispered. I know all names. I know all stories. I know the prayers spoken aloud and the ones whispered in the darkness when hope seems lost. Jesus took her hands in his and Margaret felt warmth spread through her body, easing aches she had carried for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to be without them. Your son is lost, but that doesn't mean you have to lose yourself trying to find him. Who are you? Margaret asked, though some part of her already knew the answer. Before Jesus could respond, they heard heavy footsteps on the stairs outside, followed by cursing and the sound of someone stumbling. Thomas had returned, drunk already despite the early hour, his pockets lighter but his anger heavier. The door burst open, and Thomas lurched inside, his eyes immediately fixing on the stranger kneeling beside his mother's wheelchair, his face contorted with suspicion and rage. "Who the hell are you?" Thomas demanded, advancing into the room with the aggressive swagger of someone looking for a fight. "This is my house. You got no right to be here." Jesus stood slowly, turning to face Thomas with an expression of infinite patience. "Your house? I believe this apartment belongs to your mother. She pays the rent with her pension." "That's my pension," Thomas roared. "She's just holding on to it until she dies. And who are you to come into my home and tell me otherwise?" "I'm someone who hears prayers," Jesus said simply. "I'm someone who sees what happens behind closed doors. I'm someone who has watched you raise your hand against the woman who gave you life, and I'm here to ask you one question. Why?" Thomas laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Why? Because she's a burden. Because she won't just die and get it over with. Because I'm tired of playing nurse to an old woman who can't even walk. You want to judge me? Fine. But you don't know what it's like being stuck here, watching your life slip away while you change diapers and listen to the same stories over and over." "You're right," Jesus said, and his voice carried such authority that Thomas fell silent. "I don't know what it's like to be you, but I do know what it's like to be betrayed by someone you love. I know what it's like to suffer at the hands of those you would die to protect. And I know what it's like to look at someone and see not what they are, but what they could be." He moved closer to Thomas, who found himself unable to back away, frozen in place by something he couldn't name. Fear, perhaps, or recognition, or the sudden terrible understanding that he stood before someone who saw him completely, every ugly truth laid bare. "Look at your mother," Jesus commanded, and Thomas's head turned against his will. "Really look at her, not as an obstacle or a burden, but as a human being. Tell me what you see." Thomas looked, and for the first time in years, he actually saw. He saw the way his mother's hands trembled constantly from the nerve damage caused by years of hard work. He saw the hollowness in her cheeks from too many meals skipped so he could drink. He saw the fear in her eyes, the resignation, the bottomless well of love that somehow still existed despite everything he had done to extinguish it. "I see an old woman," Thomas said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You see a woman who worked 2 jobs to feed you when your father left. You see a woman who went without new clothes for 5 years, so you could have a computer for school. You see a woman who believed in you even when you didn't believe in yourself." Jesus placed his hand on Thomas's shoulder, and Thomas felt something break inside him, some wall he had built to keep out guilt and shame. "You see your mother." "William, stop," Thomas whispered, but tears were already streaming down his face. "You asked when she would die so you could have her pension," Jesus continued relentlessly. "Let me show you what you're really asking for." He touched Thomas's forehead, and suddenly Thomas was no longer standing in the apartment. He was somewhere else, someone else, witnessing moments of his life as if watching a movie, but feeling every emotion with crushing intensity. He saw himself at 6 years old, terrified during a thunderstorm, and his mother holding him close, singing softly until his fear subsided. He felt her love like a physical warmth surrounding him, protecting him. He saw himself at 16, drunk for the first time, and his mother finding him vomiting in the bathroom. She didn't yell or punish. She cleaned him up, put him to bed, and sat beside him all night to make sure he was safe. He felt her worry, her determination to save him from himself. He saw himself at 25, losing his first real job, convinced he was a failure. His mother had taken him out for coffee and told him about all the times she had failed, all the jobs she had lost, all the mistakes she had made. She told him that failure was just proof you were trying, and she made him believe he could try again. He felt her faith in him, unshakable and pure, and then the vision shifted, showing him the future he was creating. He saw his mother dying alone in this apartment, calling for him with her last breaths. And he wasn't there because he was at a casino, spending her final pension check. He felt her loneliness, her heartbreak, the bitter knowledge that her son had never truly loved her, only what she could give him. He saw himself inheriting nothing because creditors seized everything to pay his debts. He saw himself aging badly, his liver failing, his body breaking down from years of abuse. He saw himself alone in a cheap motel room, dying without dignity, without anyone who cared enough to claim his body. But then the vision changed again, showing an alternative path. He saw himself choosing differently. He saw himself apologizing, really apologizing, and meaning it. He saw himself getting help for his addictions, finding work, rebuilding his life. He saw years of quiet moments with his mother, conversations and shared meals, the slow reconstruction of trust. He saw himself at her bedside when she finally passed, many years in the future, holding her hand and telling her he loved her, and knowing she believed him because he had proven it every day. He saw himself becoming the man she had always believed he could be. Jesus removed his hand and Thomas collapsed to his knees, sobbing with an abandon he hadn't allowed himself since childhood. The weight of what he had become, what he had done, crushed down on him with unbearable force. "I'm sorry," he gasped between sobs. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. Mom, I'm so sorry." Margaret wheeled herself closer, her own tears falling freely. She reached out and touched her son's head, running her fingers through his hair the way she used to when he was small. "I know, baby. I know." Jesus watched them, his expression unreadable. "Thomas Sullivan, you stand at a crossroads. One path leads to the future you just witnessed. The other leads somewhere better, but it requires work. It requires you to face the things you've been running from. It requires you to become someone new." Thomas looked up at him, his face raw with emotion. "I don't know if I can. I'm weak. I'm an addict. I'm a failure. You're human," Jesus corrected gently, "which means you're capable of both great evil and great good. The question isn't whether you can change. The question is whether you will." "I want to," Thomas said desperately. "I swear I want to. But I've tried before and I always fall back into the same patterns." "That's because you were trying alone," Jesus said. "Change doesn't happen in isolation. You need help. You need support. You need to admit that you cannot do this by yourself." He glanced at Margaret. "And your mother needs protection from you until you prove you've changed. Love without boundaries is not love. It's enabling." Margaret's face fell. "You mean he has to leave?" "I mean he has to earn the right to stay," Jesus clarified. "There are programs that can help him. Places where he can get sober, learn to manage his anger, understand the roots of his behavior. And while he does that work, you need to be safe." He walked to the window and looked out at the neighborhood. "There's a shelter 3 blocks from here that has an opening. Margaret, they can help you until Thomas proves he's ready to be trusted again." "Thomas? There's a rehabilitation center outside the city that has a bed available tonight. If you choose to go, if you choose to do the work, you'll have a chance to rebuild. But if you choose to stay on the path you're on, I promise you, the future you witnessed will come to pass." Thomas remained on his knees, his body shaking. Every fiber of his being screamed for a drink, for escape, for the comfortable numbness that had been his companion for so long. But beneath that craving, deeper than the addiction, was a tiny spark of the boy he used to be, the boy who loved his mother, the boy who had dreamed of becoming someone who mattered. "I'll go," he whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes." Jesus nodded. "Good. But know this. I will be watching, not to punish, but to witness. 6 months from now, I'll return. What I find will determine what comes next." He moved toward the door, his purpose here fulfilled. Margaret called out to him, "Wait, I don't even know your name. Who are you, really?" Jesus turned back, and for just a moment, the humble appearance fell away, and Margaret saw him as he truly was, radiant with a light that seemed to come from within, ancient and eternal and infinitely loving. Then the vision faded, and he was just a man again, ordinary and forgettable. "You know who I am," he said softly. "You've prayed to me every night for 40 years. You asked for help, and I came." Then he was gone, slipping out of the apartment and down the stairs, leaving mother and son alone with their tears and their choices, and the fragile hope that redemption might still be possible. Thomas didn't go to the bar that night. He packed a small bag and called the number for the rehabilitation center that Jesus had written on a scrap of paper left on the kitchen table. Within hours, he was in a car heading out of the city, leaving behind the apartment and his mother and the man he had been. Margaret watched him go with a mixture of hope and terror. She had lived with her son's cruelty for so long that his absence felt strange, like a tooth that had been pulled. Leaving a gap she kept probing with her tongue. That night she wheeled herself to the window and looked out at the street, wondering if she had imagined the whole thing, but she knew she hadn't. The warmth she had felt when Jesus touched her hand still lingered. The aches in her bones had subsided, and on the table sat the scrap of paper with 2 phone numbers written in a neat, steady hand, one for the rehabilitation center and one for the shelter. She picked up her phone and dialed the second number. 6 months passed like a slow river, carrying both Margaret and Thomas toward an unknown destination. Thomas suffered through withdrawal in a cold room with bars on the windows, shaking and sweating and crying as his body purged years of poison. He attended therapy sessions where he was forced to confront the ugliness inside him, the resentment and entitlement and rage that had twisted him into something he barely recognized. He listened to other addicts tell their stories and realized he wasn't unique, wasn't special in his suffering or his failures. He was just another human being who had taken wrong turns and hurt people he loved. Margaret lived at the shelter, sharing a room with 2 other elderly women who had their own stories of children who had failed them. They formed a quiet community, these forgotten mothers, supporting each other through dark nights and difficult days. Margaret began attending a support group for victims of elder abuse, and for the first time, she spoke aloud about what her son had done to her. The shame that had kept her silent began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. Thomas was allowed 1 phone call per week. Sometimes he called his mother, and they talked awkwardly about nothing, neither of them quite ready to address the elephant in the room. Other times he couldn't bring himself to dial, afraid of what he might hear in her voice, afraid she wouldn't answer, afraid she would. The months passed, and slowly, painfully, Thomas began to change. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, no lightning bolt moment of clarity. It was hard work, boring and repetitive and humbling. It was admitting every day that he was powerless over his addictions. It was learning to sit with discomfort instead of numbing it. It was accepting that he had hurt people, and that apologies, while necessary, weren't sufficient to undo the damage. He got a job in the kitchen at the rehabilitation center, washing dishes for minimum wage. It was humiliating for a man who had once managed a team at a tech company, but it was honest work, and he found a strange peace in the repetition of it. Scrub, rinse, stack. Scrub, rinse, stack. Each clean dish felt like a small act of redemption. 6 months to the day after Jesus had walked out of that apartment, Thomas stood at the bus station with a duffel bag containing everything he owned. The director of the rehabilitation center had offered him a permanent job and a room on campus, but Thomas knew he needed to go back, to face his mother, to see if the changes he felt inside would hold up in the real world. He arrived at the shelter just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the building's facade. His hand shook as he pressed the buzzer, and when the door opened, a volunteer led him to a small visiting room where Margaret waited. She looked different, healthier certainly. The bruises were long gone and there was color in her cheeks, but it was more than that. She sat straighter in her wheelchair, and her eyes met his without fear. She had found her strength in his absence. "Mom," Thomas said, and his voice broke on the word. "Thomas." She didn't smile, didn't rush to embrace him. She simply looked at him, assessing, measuring the man before her against the son she remembered. They sat in silence for a long moment, and Thomas realized he had no idea what to say. All the apologies he had rehearsed seemed inadequate, all the promises hollow. So instead, he simply told her the truth. "I don't know if I'm better," he said. "I'm trying to be. Every day I wake up and I have to choose not to drink, not to give in to anger, not to blame everyone else for my problems. Some days it's easy. Most days it's not. But I'm trying." Margaret nodded slowly. "That's all I ever wanted. For you to try. I hurt you." Thomas's eyes filled with tears. "I can list all the things I did, all the ways I failed you, but what it comes down to is this. I hurt the person who loved me most in this world. I don't know if I can ever make that right." "You can't," Margaret said, and Thomas flinched at the bluntness of it. "What's done is done, Thomas. You can't erase it or fix it or make it go away, but you can choose what happens next." "I want to take care of you," Thomas said desperately. "Really take care of you the way you took care of me. I have a job now. It doesn't pay much, but I can find us a new apartment, somewhere with no bad memories. I can cook your meals and help you with your therapy and— No. Margaret's voice was firm. Not yet. Thomas felt his heart sink. You don't forgive me. I do forgive you, Margaret said, and she reached out to take his hand. But forgiveness doesn't mean everything goes back to the way it was. You need more time to prove you've changed. And I need more time to trust you again. I love you, Thomas. I never stopped loving you, but I won't put myself back into a situation where you can hurt me. Then what do we do? Thomas asked, feeling lost. We take it slow, Margaret said. You find your own place. You keep going to your meetings. You keep working your job. And we see each other maybe once a week at first in public places. We rebuild trust the way you should build anything important. One brick at a time, on a solid foundation. Thomas wanted to argue, to promise that he had changed, that she could trust him now. But he remembered what he had learned in therapy, that action spoke louder than words, that trust was earned through consistency over time, that real change was measured in years, not months. Okay, he said, one brick at a time. They talked for another hour, carefully avoiding the worst of the past, focusing instead on small things. Margaret told him about the other women at the shelter, about the ceramics class she had started taking. Thomas told her about the rehabilitation center, about the friends he had made there, people who understood addiction because they lived with it too. When it was time to leave, Thomas stood and hesitated, unsure if he was allowed to hug her. Margaret opened her arms and he bent down, carefully, gently, and held her in an embrace that felt both familiar and strange. I love you, Mom, he whispered. I know, she said. Now prove it. As Thomas left the shelter and walked back to the bus station, he didn't notice the man standing across the street watching. Jesus had returned, as promised, to witness the outcome of the choice Thomas had made 6 months ago. He saw the tension in Thomas's shoulders, the careful way he moved like someone carrying something fragile. He saw the determination mixed with fear, the hope tempered by realistic doubt. It wasn't a perfect ending. Thomas would stumble many times in the years ahead. He would have moments of weakness where the old patterns called to him, but he would also have moments of strength where he chose differently, where he became the man his mother had always believed he could be. Jesus smiled and turned away, satisfied. The work here wasn't finished, but it had begun, and that was enough. He walked down the street as evening settled over the city, heading toward the next person who needed him, the next prayer that required answering. Because the work was never done, there were always more broken families to heal, more lost souls to guide home, more chances to offer redemption to those who thought they were beyond saving. And sometimes, the greatest miracle wasn't changing someone overnight. It was giving them the tools and the time to change themselves, one difficult choice at a time, until they woke up one day and realized they had become someone new. Margaret returned to her room at the shelter that night and sat by the window, looking out at the darkening sky. She thought about her son, about the long road ahead, about the uncertainty that still shadowed their future. But she also thought about the man who had appeared in her apartment 6 months ago, who had heard her prayer and answered it in a way she never expected. She didn't know if Thomas would succeed. She didn't know if their relationship would ever truly heal. But she knew she had done the right thing by protecting herself, while still leaving the door open for reconciliation. She had learned that love didn't mean accepting abuse, that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, that hope could coexist with boundaries. And somewhere out there, walking streets she would never see, Jesus carried her gratitude with him like a light in the darkness. Proof that faith still mattered, that prayers were still heard, that even in the worst circumstances, change remained possible. The inheritance Thomas had craved so desperately, his mother's pension and possessions, suddenly seemed worthless compared to what he stood to gain if he stayed the course. His humanity, his dignity, his mother's trust, and perhaps someday the ability to look at himself in the mirror without shame. It wasn't the ending either of them had expected, but it was a beginning, and in this broken world, beginnings were their own kind of miracle.